Hi everyone, this is Ron Pereira with Gemba Academy, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is titled Factory One and is being presented by Dan Markovitz. A little bit about Gemba Academy. We produce online and DVD-based lean enterprise training to more than 1,000 customers around the world. We currently offer more than 230 lean training videos covering topics such as 5S, the 7 ways, value stream mapping, and Kanban implementation. And we do this through our unique site-based subscriptions, where a single subscription is all you need to train everyone at your site. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's presenter. Well, Dan Markovitz is the founder and president of TimeBack Management, where he focuses on improving individual and team productivity through the adaptation of lean concepts. He's a faculty member of the Lean Enterprise Institute and teaches classes at The Ohio State University Fisher School of Business. And I am an Ohio State University fan, so I did have to slip in the Ohio State University, so sorry for any Michigan fans out there. Dan's book on improving personal performance by utilizing lean manufacturing techniques, A Factory of One, was published by Productivity Press in December. And Dan blogs weekly at his website, timebackmanagement.com, and tweets under the handle @timeback. So we flew through those slides a little bit fast there. So, but again, we'll have all that in a recorded version of the webinar as well. Now, so without further delay, I'd like to just go ahead and turn things over to Dan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. I am showing here a picture of a pair of shoes, which may seem a little bit odd. Years ago, I used to work at ASICS. I was in charge of footwear product marketing and product development for running shoes. And this was one of our, at the time, a real big innovation. We had done an awful lot of new things to the outsole of this shoe, to the midsole of the shoe, and we did something very new in terms of tongue construction. And it was a fairly arduous process. There were a lot of changes, a lot of technical issues that we had to grapple with. And finally, we overcame all of them. We had our factory specs, our specs sent off to the factory, and everything was ready to go. And I took the shoe very proudly, the final sample, to my boss, who has, as the saying goes, forgotten more about shoes than I will ever know. And I show it to Gary, and Gary looks at it, and he's humming and And he's from the South, so he doesn't talk that much, and when he does, he talks very slowly. And he says finally, Dan, do you notice anything odd about this or anything different? And I said, well, yeah, you know, we've got this cool new thing going on in the outsole, and we've got this cool new thing going on in the midsole, and we've got this new tongue construction. He says, yeah, I know all that, but do you see anything odd here? And I said, well, we've got some cool new stuff going on. And Gary said, well, take a look at the tongue. And I said, yeah, I know. This tongue construction with the different stitching and the different pattern and all this stuff, this was really difficult to do. And he said, Dan, how long is the tongue? And I look at it, and then it hits me. The tongue is too short. The tongue is too short by about 5 or 6 millimeters, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when a tongue on a running shoe is too short, instead of folding up against your shin, it starts poking you in the shin, which is colossally uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the cutting dies had already been made. The package had been sent off to the factory, and in order to make a change to improve that, well, the factory wasn't very happy about this, but on top of that, it cost us $25,000 for a whole new set of cutting dies for all the men's shoes and the women's shoes. And that made me think, you know, there's got to be a better way. And that was the beginning of my lean journey, which culminated in my understanding of work, knowledge work, and knowledge workers as a factory of one. This is the title of my book, of course, as Ron had indicated earlier, and some of you may have either seen or bought my book already. And it's really a metaphor. The concept is that you are a factory. Toyota is a factory, or a Toyota factory takes all kinds of inputs of metal and glass and rubber and steel and plastic and wires, and they produce cars. And Kellogg's take sugar and flour and water, and they make Pop-Tarts. You're a factory as well. You take a whole bunch of inputs. You take information that you know that you have. You take customer requests. You take ideas of your own. You mix in a good dose of pizza, some beer, Of course, if your company doesn't like that, maybe you want to not do the beer and you do some soda and some Red Bull, and you mix it all together, and out comes the other end. Something really, as the words go, insanely great. This makes you a factory. There's inputs and there's outputs, and we can take the lean concepts that work on a production line or that work in even a process like, say, generating invoices or something like this, something very standard, and we can improve the process by using the same tools that we use. We can improve your own processes the same way that we improve those. Now, this is a picture of John Wooden. For those of you who don't know, John Wooden was without a doubt the greatest college basketball coach of all time. He coached at UCLA. He won 10 NCAA titles, including 8 in a row. The next closest person is the recently retired Pat Summitt, who won 8 women's titles. On the men's side, the next closest person has 4 NCAA titles. John Wooden once went 88 games, nearly 3 years without a loss. And the reason I show John Wooden is that he's famous for his very first practice each year. He's got a whole bunch of high school, college freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors, and the very first practice is not about the fancy offensive plays they're going to run. It's not about the intricacies of a man-to-man or zone defense. The very first practice is about how to put on your socks and how to tie your shoes. It's as simple and as basic as that. And John Wooden's feeling was that if you don't get those fundamentals right, if you don't get those basics right, you are not going to be able to do the complex stuff. If your shoelace comes untied, good luck trying to guard someone man-to-man. If your sock puckers underneath your foot and you end up with a blister, you're going to have real problems running up and down the court. So if you don't get that foundation right, no matter how simple that foundation seems, you're going to have real problems doing the more complex things. So some of the ideas I talk about today are going to seem a little bit simple, but bear with me because they are foundational and will make it possible for you to implement the more complex lean work that you're doing. I think it's important to remember as well that regardless of the institution you're in, you should ignore the culture. A lot of people say, yeah, you know, I would love to do some of this stuff, but we are not a lean organization. You can ignore it because you can change the way you work. You can change your corner of the world. And no one's going to say boo about it. You may not be able to change the company, but your section, your team, and yourself, you can do. I want to remind you as well that you don't need permission. If we're talking about changing the way that you work individually, well then it's very, very easy to do it because you don't need to get permission to do something. You're not talking about investment in equipment. You're not talking about a way of changing the way you work in a significant enough way that's going to shake up the company. So you have the opportunity to make changes to improve your performance and productivity and efficiency, to eliminate the waste without upsetting the apple cart. As with anything lean, the most important thing, the first step, I believe, is to identify the value and identify the waste in what you do. This is sometimes easy, sometimes hard. I know a lot of you know about value and waste. When I look at it from a white-collar perspective, for example, if you take a look at a lawyer, maybe drafting a patent claim is a value-added activity, calculating billable hours, which no one wants to pay for, is nevertheless necessary, and correcting errors is made by associates. That's clearly waste. These kinds of things, though, these value-added, non-value-added, and waste activities, you know, anyone can see these, right? It's a real duh. I know what waste is. I know what non-value-added is. But there is a lot of waste that's hiding in your work that's less easy to see, that's more difficult to spot. Samuel Colbert, a professor at UCLA, is probably one of the most strident and outspoken critics of performance reviews. As he says, it's a one-side accountable boss-administered review, that it's little more than a dysfunctional pretense, and that's when he's being kind. If you think about performance reviews, the purpose really is to provide guidance for your direct reports. It's to help them understand where they're going to go, and it's to help them improve performance. And performance reviews actually do none of that. On the other hand, they consume an enormous amount of time, effort, and energy. They're hugely wasteful. And what's happening here, I believe, is that we're confusing the deliverable, which is a performance report that was mandated in a certain format by the HR department, with the value that our customer, in this case our direct report, is going to receive. If we separate in our minds the difference between the value and the deliverable, I think we can begin to reduce the waste and give ourselves more time to create actual value. Phil Libin, the head of Evernote, was interviewed last week or 2 weeks ago in the New York Times, and he said this: we always try to ask whether a particular policy exists because it's a default piece of corporate stupidity or whether it actually helps you accomplish something. He was referring in particular to vacation policies. At Evernote, he doesn't have a vacation policy. If you need time off, you take time off, period, end of story. And again, if you think about the value of vacation is to allow people to refresh. It's allow them to allow people to take care of personal issues that they can't do if they're working all the time. The way it's delivered, the deliverable, is all this paperwork and forms that have to be filled out and tracking. And he says this is insane. We're treating people like children. We make it seem as though being at work is a punishment. And he's gotten rid of it. What I think is very useful is to start creating what I call a value stream map. Value stream map may be not the best word for it because that can be confusing. Think of it this way: making a chart of who your customers are. Who are you serving? This is a chart that I made, a map that I made of all of my customers when I was working at the head of product marketing at ASICS. I had my direct reports, of course. I had the Marcom team, customer service and sales, and so on. And what I tried to do was identify what it is they needed from me. So I talked about direct reports, for example. They needed me to help them problem solve. They needed career development and guidance. They did not need at all a performance report. The sales team didn't necessarily need me to attend all of their meetings. They needed me to educate their sales force at our sales meetings. Now, what does that mean? What format does that take? That's entirely up to me. Originally when I got there, they said, well, you have to stand up and do this presentation, do this kind of talk, and by separating out the format, the deliverable, from the value that I was giving, that made it a whole lot easier for us to come up with creative ways that were more tightly tied into the value they wanted with less waste. So spotting the value and spotting the waste in your work, I think, is the first step. I think it's also important to start talking about some lean tools. We're going to talk about 3 lean tools, and the first one I want to bring up is 5S. Not necessarily because you have to start with 5S, but because it happens to be first up in my presentation. And since I've been talking now for about 12 or 13 minutes, what I'd like to do is give you a chance to weigh in here. I'm going to have you do in the question area. I'd like you to answer this. I'm going to show you a slide for a few seconds. I want you to tell me how many circles you see and how many colors you see. Very simple. So just in the questions area, please write down how many circles and how many colors. And I'm going to show you the slide starting now. Okay, how many circles, how many colors did you see? Just type it into the questions area. I should be able to see those if the magic of webinars is working properly. And Ron, if you start seeing them, because I'm not seeing anything at this point. If you start seeing anything, please let me know.
They're flying in here, hundreds of them. So I'll just kind of rattle a few off here.
Yeah, just give me some, highs and lows.
We got Jorge said 15 circles and 18 and 4, 20 circles, 3 colors, 20 circles and 5 blues and 5 yellow, 20 circles, 4 colors, 25 circles, 4 colors, 28 circles. So
we're all over the dish. We've been as low as 15. We've had some at 20. We've had 25.
Yeah.
Anything higher than 25, Ron?
I've got a 27. Got a 28 circles.
All right, some 28. I'm guessing here that no one would want to bet me $1, leaving aside the logistical complexity of betting me $1 and trying to follow up on that. No one feels 100% confident. So I want to try this exercise one more time. And again, what I'd like you to do is, when you've got the answer, I'm going to show you the circles, and when you got the answer, I want you to write it into the question area for Ron. So one more time, how many circles, how many colors, and go. All right. How many circles, how many colors? Ron, can you weigh in?
Yeah, let's see what we got here. Yeah, trying to go to the most recent ones here. There are like hundreds of them.
Right.
15 circles. No, that's the old one here. So
that's an old one.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, while Ron is looking through that, I'm hoping that, and I always get nervous, with No Child Left Behind and all that stuff, I'm hoping that everyone was able to come up with 27,
Yeah, 27, 3 colors. Yeah, 27/3. They're all flying in.
There we go. So, yeah, again, I'm glad that No Child Left Behind is working, and everyone got 27 here. So, pretty simple. It's the same amount, same information, the exact same information, it's just presented differently. And that's really significant. Back in 1997, so this is before really the paperless office, the Wall Street Journal did a survey of about 2,500 executives assessing how they spent their time, and they found that they were spending 6 weeks a year. 6 weeks a year simply looking for information. And all we have to do is go back to what you just, the experiment you guys just had with the circles and the colors. Same amount of time. It took you a whole lot longer to figure out what you had. 6 weeks a year. About 2-3 years ago, Chevron embarked on this massive IT upgrade because they found on their internal surveys that their users, their employees, were spending between 2 and 3 days a month. 2 to 3 days a month looking for information. Again, that's not doing anything with information. That's simply looking for it. Then, of course, you add to the mix the fact that email is starting to explode, right? People are getting more and more messages every single year, to the extent now that when a long time ago people used to think that Gmail was the answer to everything. I'm going to get Gmail, I'll be able to find anything, and now apparently there's at least one company that is supposed to help you manage your Gmail problem. At the end of the day, I think what we've got is that you just have too much mail. There's so much, you don't know how to handle it, you don't know how to manage it. And this is really a metaphor for all the information you have. There's just too much of it. It comes at you so quickly, and you end up in a situation with those messy circles. This, by the way, is a screenshot from one of my former clients. I'm not proud of this. I'm not sure if she is either. But she can't even figure out what it is she can safely throw away. So here it is in 2012. She actually has the things that she's deleted, all the things that she deleted in 2010, plus all the things from 2010 that she wanted to keep. So frankly, the distinction between the two categories, or the three categories, makes no sense to me at all. But the point here is that she is overwhelmed and can't figure out where to put stuff. This has its analog, of course, in the paper office. This is Oscar winner Al Gore. After he left the vice presidency, there he is with his 3 giant video monitors from Apple. And I can tell you that even if he had the cure or the answer to global warming in his office, he would not be able to find it. It may be in there, but it's as easy to find as those circles and colors that I gave you. Now, when I show the next slide, this usually gets people anxious. They think, oh God, this jerk's going to be walking around with a white glove and telling me that this is the answer, right? 5S for the knowledge worker. It means putting tape outlines around the desk. And that's not true at all. This is what Mark Graban, who some of you may know, has coined as LAME, lean as misguidedly executed. The tape outlines is a transference of the 5S concept from the factory floor to the office. But it's stupid because no one, as far as I know, has ever lost their computer. They may have lost their stapler, but by and large, they don't lose their office equipment. It stays on their desk and it doesn't matter where it is. So you end up with companies like Kyocera, which has a 5S cop walking around telling people how many pictures they can have on their desk and telling them where they can hang their sweaters. I mean, that's pointless. The goal of 5S, of course, is to help you find the information you need quickly and easily, and it's to help you spot abnormalities. And 5S, in my mind, is for information, which is what's relevant to you, because that's what you traffic in, information. 5S is best exemplified by something that the nurses at the Covenant Health System did a couple of years ago. So the nurses of the Covenant Health System found that they were spending 6 hours, 6.1 hours actually, of every 12-hour shift working on paperwork. not taking care of patients. They were spending 50% of their time filling out forms. They were generating 2.2 million pieces of paper every single year. So what did they do? They said, this is crazy, this is not sustainable, and it's not good patient care. And they said, well, why don't we bring 5S the information we manage? And in their case, that meant redesigning all of the forms, getting rid of the redundant forms, and making sure that the patient's name was always in the same place, and the doctor's signature always went in the same place, and the notes went in the same place, and so on and so forth. And they ended up by cutting down the amount of time they spent working on paper by 50%. They're now down to 3 hours or 3.1 hours for every 12-hour shift of handling the paperwork, because they don't have as many forms, and the forms are consolidated in a way to make it easy to work with. That's what 5S is, and that's what I'd like you to think about. Not tape outlines on your desk, but rather how can you structure your information so that you can find it when you need it, quickly, easily, and in an error-free fashion. 5S to me always ties into visual management, and that's the next tool I want to talk about. And the best way to introduce that concept is to talk about JAM. Well, not really JAM, but to talk about a woman named Sheena Iyengar. Sheena Iyengar she's a professor of business at Columbia Business School. She has a PhD in psychology, and for her dissertation, she went to a supermarket with 6 jars of jam. She took 6 jars of jam out, and she started giving samples to people as they came in. Hey, try the raspberry, try the blackberry, try the orange, try the lingonberry, try the olalaberry. And as a result, jam sales increased. And that sort of makes sense, right? Because people try it, they find something they like, and they say, yeah, maybe I'll get some jam, I'm a little bit low. And that, in fact, is why you see people giving out samples in supermarkets all the time. So Sheena went a little bit further, and she did the experiment one more time, but this time she did it with 24 flavors of jam from one product, from one company, and she gave people samples of every kind they're willing at least to try. So try the lingonberry, the gooseberry, the olalaberry, the blackberry, the boysenberry, the raspberry. And she tracked sales. And this time she found the sales went down. In fact, they went down by 700%. Not just a little bit. Sales went down by 700%. So she started scratching her head trying to figure out what happened, and she finally decided that choice is paralyzing. That we get overwhelmed easily when we have too many options. And when you've got too much to choose from, you end up defaulting to inaction or to something that is nearly brainless. So I believe that when you start to take a look at your ability to choose and act what to do, and you take a look at the number of choices you have, and in particular, because we're talking about knowledge workers, that's manifested as your to-do list if you keep one of those, or it's manifested as your inbox if you're using your inbox as a to-do list. The more choices you have, the less able you are to actually do something, which means, and I'm sure you've had this experience, if you're using your inbox as a to-do list, you sort of scroll up and down, or if you've got a paper to-do list, you look up and down, you try to figure out which one you're going to do, you try to find the easy one so you can pick it off in 2 or 3 minutes or 30 seconds so you can cross it off and feel like you've done something, and you can't make a decision. And you have to review it over and over and over again. Or if you have a paper to-do list, you look at it for a little while, and then you think, you know what, before I do one of these bigger things, let me just check my email. And you end up not actually doing anything because choice is paralyzing. Which brings me, I think, to the classic of all time, one of the great Dilberts. This is the beaver, or the lazy beaver, and Dogbert. What I believe is that you need to live in your calendar and not in your inbox. There are about 500 people on this webinar now, or 300 people, something like that. If I went to your desks right now, if I could take a look at them, my guess is that I would see your inbox open 98% of the time. And that means that you are not living in your calendar. You're using your inbox as a guide of what to do. And you can't work effectively because, as Sheena pointed out, choice is paralyzing. I think it's a lot better to control your work and to make it visible by using your calendar, by living in your calendar and actually scheduling the work you have to do. Most people just schedule their meetings. But by actually creating visibility for all the work you have to do, as you can see in this image, you give yourself a fighting chance of being able to actually accomplish the stuff that's really important. It also gives you a greater ability to prioritize, because now the most recent thing, the squeakiest wheel, doesn't necessarily get the grease, because you can now evaluate, well, here's this new thing that's just cropped up, here's the thing I was supposed to do. And now you can make a better decision about what it is you want. Now, some people don't like calendars for a variety of reasons. It's not worth going into them. But a lot of people use whiteboards, and this is a friend of mine used to use this as his whiteboard. You'll notice he had a task and what he needed to do, when it was due by, and the status of it, and he said this didn't work for him because essentially he had his infinite to-do list. And instead, he moved to something inspired by a guy named Jim Benson, the author of Personal Kanban. He moved to this model of a personal Kanban, where he lists his backlog, he's got his whip in the middle, and he lists the things that are done. What's important about this is, one, he's able to color code by different, whatever the categories are that he's using. I think he had some Project A in one color, Project B in another, and I think purple was personal stuff. He's also able to control his whip, so that rather than being overloaded, he can say at any given, and being paralyzed by choice, he can say, these are the 4 things that I'm doing, or 3 things that I'm doing, and that's it. And then the done column gives him visibility into what he's accomplished, so he has a sense of context. Now, there are infinite varieties of how to use a whiteboard to control that work and to make it visible. This is something that that John Miller from Gemba Academy did. Actually, taking PDCA really to heart, he created a personal Kanban, and he's listed his work in the various phases of P, D, C, and A. This is a Kanban from Jim Benson, actually, a Kanban that he was using when he was writing his book called Personal Kanban. And what's interesting here is at the top is sort of a micro view. He can see his backlog, he can see the individual tasks, what needs to be, what he's doing on, and you can see he's got 5 items, and he has his done. And at the bottom, he has the entire value stream listed out, the backlog, the pre-writing, focus, whatever that means, editing, second edit, and so on. So he gets to see both a bird's eye view and a ground level view of the work that he's doing. This is a Kanban that a small group used at a biomedical device maker. You can see you've got 4 people in the horizontal rows. You can see their backlog. You can see the stuff they're waiting on. So now they know when they've done something and they're waiting for other people, there's a way to track the work. You can see they've limited their whip to 3 items. The pop-ups, these are the must-dos. The people call them up and say, hey, this has to be done today. They're actually limiting it to 1 per person or 2 per person. And then again, done to give them context. So there are a variety of ways to do this. But what's really important here is that they're making their work visible, so that rather than all the work sitting in a pile of unread messages in their inbox, rather than being a big pile of paper on their desk, they have a very clear sense of what needs to be done. And this gives them the freedom to act aggressively and decisively. The next idea I want to talk about is flow. And flow, of course, is a very, very specific meaning when we talk about it in lean terms, about how material moves through a factory. But serendipitously for us, and conveniently, a guy named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I'll give you $5 if you can pronounce that. He is a Hungarian professor at Claremont College in California now. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, it took me weeks to learn to say that, by the way. Mihai wrote a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And he talked about the concept of psychological flow, which, without getting into too many details, really is akin to being in the zone, where you're immersed in something, you're being challenged but not overwhelmed, and you have a chance to really chew on problems and make progress and progress. Unfortunately, usually we don't get flow in our lives. But I would argue that the kind of flow you want in a factory or in a production facility, the kind of flow you want for materials, is the same kind of flow you want for your own work, your knowledge work, and your thinking. I want to introduce now a short experiment, because again, I've been talking, and this is going to require you to take a piece of paper and a pen if you've got one near you. And what I'd like you to do is draw two lines. Parallel lines on a piece of paper, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches long. They don't, maybe an inch or two apart. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just 2 basic lines. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a sentence to write. The sentence, I'll tell you right now, is multitasking is a lie. And you're going to write the sentence on the top, the letters on the top, and you're going to write numbers on the bottom. For each letter you write, you're going to write a number on the bottom. So it would look something like this. You're going to write M1, and then U on the top line and 2 on the bottom, and L on the top and 3 on the bottom, and then T and 4, and I and 5. So you're going to alternate letter number, letter number, letter number, letter number, until you get multitasking is a lie. And eventually it's 18 letters long, so there's no mystery there. You don't even have to count. It's just going to be multitasking is a lie. Alternating letter number, letter number. And what I'd like you to do again is I'd like you to time yourself. So in the question area, when you're done, what I'd like you to do is just type in how long it took you to complete writing the sentence multitasking is a lie and writing the numbers 1 to 18. And you can start, I'll tell you when to start. I'm guessing everyone's got their pencils and pens ready and their paper. And why don't you start now? When you're done, give your time to run. Multitasking is a lie.
All right, waiting for him to come in. So how fast can you do it, Dan?
Yeah. Well, when it usually takes me to do this about 25 seconds, and I usually make at least 1 error, if not 2, and sometimes 3, depending on how.
So we've got 20, we've got 25, I've got 30, I got 26, I got 33, I got 18, I got 35, 37, 50, 29, 31.2. Wow, Doreen is on top.
31.2.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. 39.92. We have some engineers, I think.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, 24, 31. Got it, Jorge. Got it. Okay, 36, 33, 60.
Yeah,
Okay, so
the numbers around 25 to 50, that's usually right in the strike zone of what I see.
Yeah.
The person who is 18, that's actually surprising. If the person at 18, you don't have to answer, but did you really do alternate letter number, and was it legible afterwards? Okay, I want to do this one more time. As with all good lean simulations, there's at least 2 rounds. So there's 2 rounds here. What I'd like you to do is one more time, draw 2 horizontal lines, same thing, 3-4 inches long, 1 inch apart, something like that. And this time, we're going to do it the way an intelligent person would write this. So this time, you're going to write on the top line, multitasking is a lie. You're going to do all the letters. Just spell it out, multitasking is a lie, the way you normally would. And then as soon as you're done with the lie, you're going to start writing the numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way out to 18. And I'd like to time you one more time. So time yourself. When you're all done, send your times in to Ron, and we're going to compare the data. This one, Ron, I'm a whole lot faster with.
Okay. All right.
Although I have to say I've never timed myself down to the 10th of a second.
10, 15, 8, 11, 20, 15, 17, 16.9, 10, 15, 16, 19.1, 15, 14, 22.42, 18. So yeah,
this is a whole lot faster. We're seeing, it sounds like this is somewhere between it takes half as long, or sometimes even only 40% as long, something like that. People are much, much, much faster. And that's not really a surprise, of course, because obviously it's stupid to try to write M1, U2, L3, and so on. What's happening here, of course, is that you're trying to multitask, but you can't. And in fact, the brain can't. We end up switch tasking. You do task A, and then B, and then you go back to A, then you go back to B, and it doesn't work. And I gave you a very, very simplified, like with all lean simulations, it's a very simplified version of reality. But I asked you to do something that was actually relatively simple insofar as it's the same type of activity. You're writing, you're using the same tools, pen and paper, and even with that, it took you twice as long or more to do it where you were switch tasking. Now, this is something, I could cite you chapter and verse that I won't bother with, but it turns out that this phenomena has been studied over and over again, and whether it's at Stanford University or the University of California, Irvine, or University of Illinois, or wherever, the evidence is clear. Multitasking doesn't work. It actually slows us down because we end up switching. And no less an authority than Peter Drucker back in 1966, before cell phones, before IM, before text messages, before email, said, to be effective, every knowledge worker needs to dispose of time in large chunks. Small dribs and drabs of your time will not be sufficient even if you're at the office until 9 o'clock at night. And this is important because when you think about how you work during the day, you end up with interruptions all the time. You never get into Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's world of flow. You end up atomizing your day into little fragments. My favorite bit of data is this. It comes from Mary Cherwinski, who's a researcher at Microsoft Research Institute. And she found that people are interrupted on average every 11 minutes, that it takes about 25 minutes to get back to the task. And here's my favorite thing. 40% of the time, we never get back to it at all. 40% of the time, we just go off in an entirely different direction because we're animals and we get distracted by shiny metal objects, and we go down another road and we forget about it. And if you've ever had the experience of closing down your computer at the end of the day and you find a couple of emails that you started writing or you just addressed and you don't know who they were to or why you were writing to them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Incidentally, there's some early research that has not yet been published, although, again, there has been quite a bit done. There's some early research that says that it actually makes your brain a little bit smaller. But that has not been definitively proven, so it's not yet published. Last thing I want to talk about is standard work. Standard work is something very, very, very important for knowledge workers. But it's counterintuitive because most of us think that our work is so unpredictable and so diverse that we can't possibly bring standards to it. But that's not true, because an awful lot of our work, of course, has that variability. But much of our work is absolutely, utterly predictable. And that brings me back to my ASICS Gel DS trainer. When I said, God, there's got to be a better way so that I can avoid costing us $25,000 by missing the tongue length. And this is what I developed. No rocket science here. This was a prototype review sheet, a simple checklist. And we went through this. We made some changes over time. But anytime we would get a sample back from the factories, these were the elements that we started checking off. Atul Gawande has talked extensively, has wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto about how doctors can use checklists in hospitals. There is Peter Pronovost is a real lean thinker who's also been working on checklists in hospitals. There is a private equity company that has been written about, I don't remember their name offhand, that uses a checklist when they're planning on making an investment in a company, because if you're going to invest $10 million in a company, you may want to find out that the engineers don't want to relocate to Silicon Valley or don't want to move to Iowa before you invest the $10 million. This is a guy named Mark Jabin, and Mark is he's an emergency room doctor down in the Southeast in Florida. And Mark actually has a little sidebar in my book, A Factory of One. You can't think of any environment, I think, that's more changeable, more unpredictable, more variable than a hospital ER room, because you literally never know what patient's going to walk in next. And Mark used to get overwhelmed terribly by it. Patient charts would be piling up. He wasn't sure what to do, and he felt sort of like this, just completely overwhelmed. What do I do? And Mark figured out a standard work process for handling all those charts, so that he would categorize the patients as level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and he knew what to do. With a level 1, everything had to stop because it was a life-threatening situation. Level 5, the person could wait a little bit, and he could hand off the work to the nurse. Levels 2, 3, and 4, he would order tests, and then when he was waiting for the tests to come back, he would go visit the next patient, and then he'd grab another group of 3 charts. And even though it didn't change the volume of charts coming in, he had a sense of Zen calm so that he knew how to manage the patients coming in. I really believe that if you want to be involved in a lean transformation, you've got to not only lead by example, you've got to live the example. Some of the ideas I gave here, I think, will be helpful in enabling you to bring lean more to your world, to your desk, to your office, to the way you interact with your colleagues, so that you actually have a chance of affecting change not only for yourself, but by holding the flag and lighting the way for people to follow. So with 18 minutes to go, I wanted to stop and open the door, or open the floor, I guess, to questions and comments.
Okay, so we've got a few questions already in, so I want everybody to go ahead and, if you have any questions for Dan, please go ahead and type them in the question box there. Everybody's got a lot of practice at that already, using the box. So the first question that I have is from Mike, and it's about the multitasking. And he said, since technically it's impossible to multitask, typing an M followed by U is not really different than M followed by 1. Is something else at work? Both cases, we really aren't multitasking, are we?
Well, in the case of typing in a U followed by an M, we're not multitasking at all. We're writing the word multitasking. So that's one. I mean, and I'm not a psychologist or a neuro or a neurologist. I don't have an fMRI to see what's happening in your brain, but I believe that when you're writing, you're looking at one word or one sentence. Multitasking is a lie, and the task is to write those letters in sequence. The switching happens when you're now moving from the part of the brain that controls letters to the part of the brain that controls numbers. And so we're switching what parts of the brain needs to be activated, and every time you make that switch, you have to reassemble, and you go back to where you were, you have to reassemble the process that you were in. So you have to remember, oh, I finished the U, that means I now need to do an L. And this happens when you're changing modes all the time. If I'm talking to someone on a telephone and starting to read email, there's an excellent chance my voice is going to get kind of dreamy and distant, and I'm going to be slower at responding because I'm trying to process words in 2 different media. Does that help, Mike?
Okay, we'll have to see if he responds to that. Yes, thank you, he said. Okay, good. All right. Okay, they're flying in now. Okay, yeah. Rodrigo wanted to know, hello, Dan, is it possible to have the presentation that you showed us today? So I'll answer that. Yes. So we'll go ahead and we'll make this presentation available on SlideShare, which is just a website where you can share PowerPoint slides. So we'll send an email out with instructions on how to get the slides. So everybody can thank Dan for that. Olga has a kind of just a pretty general question, but maybe it's maybe a lot of people have the same one. Is how do you get started with everything that you just talked about? Because you covered a lot. So what's a good area to begin in?
I would begin at the beginning of the presentation, which is what's the value and what's the waste. Yogi Berra once said that you can see a lot just by looking. And I think that if you step back, it sounds kind of odd to look at your own work, but I think if you step back for a minute and look at what you do, make that map that I talked about, that customer map. Who do you support? What value are they expecting from you? And again, I don't mean what deliverables. You know, they're expecting a spreadsheet. They're expecting a 50-slide PowerPoint deck once a month on the market conditions. What value are they looking for? Not the deliverable, not the form. And start to figure out how can you deliver that value in a more effective way. And what you may find is that it's useful to talk to your customer. Hey, I've been doing this for you. Is this really the best thing? Is this really the best way? My hunch is that, like with the Phil Libin, you may find there are corporate policies and there are just things that you've taken for granted that you're doing that is utterly valueless, or at the very least that you can cut out an awful lot of the work. So that's where I would start. And just to go a little bit further, for what it's worth, I remember when I was at ASICS, in fact, I'm dating myself, but the IT department used to do there was no end user computation or analysis, so you'd send a request into the IT department for a report, and you say, I want to see sales broken down by this or that or the other thing, or inventory analyzed in a certain way, and they dutifully write the report, and they would generate it. It would come out on the big dot matrix printers with the bar graph paper, and they would run that report every single week forever. Until when I was there, each week they were generating about 185 or 100 or 200 reports. It turns out most of them no one even ever looked at because they were obsolete, because no one ever told them to stop. And so what we ended up doing was looking at what they were producing and saying, well, what's the value? And they went with each report to the customers and said, hey, do you use this? Do you use this? Do you use this? And they cut their reports down from 185 a week to 37 a week.
Very good. Milton wanted me to tell you that one more comment, Dan. This was awesome, he said. So thank you, Milton.
Thank you, Milton.
Okay.
Tell my mom that, and my wife that, too.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, we have more than we're probably going to be able to cover here. Maybe we can do a follow-up podcast or something, Dan.
I'm happy to do a follow-up podcast. I'm also happy if people want to submit questions in writing. I'm happy to somehow figure out a way to respond either via email or whatever.
Yeah.
Ron, you and I can figure that out offline.
Absolutely. We'll keep going here. We still have some time. So do you have a recommended form for annual reviews?
Oh my gosh! I have heard from John Shook at the Lean Enterprise Institute that you can run annual reviews really effectively. First of all, by not making them annual. That's the first step, and the second step is to use an A3, right? Because if in truth what you're really trying to do is help change the current condition to the target condition, and what better way to do that than an A3 report?
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Francis is asking, how did following standard work help the doctor increase his performance matrix and ultimately improve his patient relationship?
Well, what Mark ended up doing, by creating the standard work, it meant that Mark knew, first of all, what he needed to do and when he needed to do it. He was less stressed out by all the charts, patient charts piling up. And when you're frazzled by, you can see out of the corner of your eye, you've got a stack of 35 charts, you get frazzled and you're not really paying attention to the patient. So Mark found that it gave him a great deal of comfort and mental peace so that he could really focus. The other thing he did, and I didn't talk about it in this presentation, is that he started looking at document flow. And he started saying, well, I know that anytime I'm going to need to do, anytime I'm going to see patients, I'm going to be asking the nurses to administer medication. I'm going to write a script for them. So what he started doing was carrying the forms around that he would need to sign, so the nurses, they wouldn't have to hunt. He could give them the forms at that moment, so they wouldn't have to interrupt him in the middle of another patient. So he was creating standards for the way they would interact with him, and standards for how and when the paperwork was handed off. And this gave him more latitude mentally, in particular mentally and emotionally, to really engage with the patients that were coming into the ED.
Okay, very good. Brian has asked, have you had any traction with human resources with removing multitasking from job descriptions?
Oh my gosh. I always giggle when I see that in job descriptions. Ability to multitask is a must, right? I've had absolutely no traction, but the truth is that generally, those descriptions generally come not from the HR department, they come from the hiring manager. And the hiring manager says, I want someone who can multitask. I want someone who can do all this stuff. And of course, everyone thinks they can. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal, oh gosh, it was either yesterday or today, about the perception of multitasking. People think they really can do it. So I think the answer is that HR tends to be an execution arm. I think it's much more important for the hiring people to say, I want to create an environment in which people aren't forced to attempt to multitask. I think that's the road to sanity.
Okay, very good. Kim asked a follow-up question to your previous answer, and she just wants to know, what's an A3? So perhaps not everybody's familiar with what an A3 is.
I believe, Shill for Gemba, I'm sure that the Gemba Academy has either a webinar or a form or some sort of information on it. Yeah. You can certainly Google A3. A3 is technically a document size. It's akin to about a ledger-sized piece of paper, 11 by 17, and it's something that was developed by Toyota as a one-page format to help identify problems, or rather to scope out problems, identify root causes, design countermeasures, and track performance of those countermeasures against the original problem. So it's a one-pager rather than a 150-slide PowerPoint deck. It's a one-page way of grappling with a problem and helping to coordinate a conversation between the person who's tackling the problem and all the people that are involved with it. And Ron, you can probably go eloquently into that.
Yeah, and we never want these to be sales commercials for Gemba Academy, but we do cover A3 in pretty good detail in our Leader Standard Work and Ocean Planning course. So if you want to learn more, check those out. And Mike just sent a message in. It's good. He said, Understanding A3 Thinking is a great book, a little repetitious, but a short read. So Understanding A3 Thinking might be a good book to check out.
There's another good book a wonderful book by the Lean Enterprise Institute called Managing to Learn, which was actually written by John Shook, and it's also a fantastic book in walking you through the process of an A3 and really doing it right, not just following the form, but understanding the purpose and the real design.
Good deal, good deal. Okay, let's see, what's next? Can you talk about measuring standard work as it relates to looking for waste, adding greater percentages of value, etc.?
I'm not sure I understand that question, but my hunch is that if you're looking for hard metrics, I think that's the wrong way to go. I think what you're trying to do when you're looking for standard work, especially for knowledge workers for whom there is a great deal of variability, is that what we're trying to do is turn, and I'm going to dive into some jargon for a second, cognitive systems into reflexive systems. Cognitive systems are systems that require intelligent intervention to manage a process. So it requires you to think about doing something. A reflexive system is something that happens automatically. So for example, if a cognitive system would be for a technician to say, oh, you know, I better go check up on the lab results for Mrs. Sanchez, for example, let me run down there. That's cognitive, and it runs the risk of the technician being sidetracked by some emergency. Turning it into a reflexive system means saying, okay, every hour, on the hour, you, the technician, go circle, you make a big pass through the lab rooms and you pick up all the reports. Or alternatively, and the lab results, and then you pass them along. Or we use visual management tools so that as soon as the lab is done, there's a sign that goes from red to green, so you know that you go in there. So there's no thinking involved. And I think to the extent that you can the purpose of standard work here is to turn those cognitive systems into reflexive systems so they're done the same way every single time without the need for evaluation, assessment, and decision making. And I think that if you use that as the primary goal and not worry about metrics, times, percentages, I think you'll be moving in the right direction.
Okay, April has a question. How can knowledge workers be effective in open office or with no cube walls, with constant interruptions and the cultural expectation of instant responses to emails, walk-by questions, IM, etc.?
Yeah, that's an outstanding question, and that really represents what people's lives are like in an awful lot of environments. So there are a few suggestions, a few countermeasures I'll throw out. One is get out of there. Sounds really simple. The chief medical officer at a hospital I know, in order to get his work done, because his day is, he's constantly barraged, he has an office, but nonetheless, you can always find him at Starbucks from 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock in the morning, or perhaps it's 6 to 7:30. And that's where he does his work for an hour and a half, uninterrupted. So, do you have a conference room? Do you have a coffee shop? Can you work in a different physical location? Another thing you can do is start using visual management tools. Programmers in Silicon Valley often will use headsets when their iPod earphones are in or when their headphones are on. That means don't interrupt. I worked with one company that used yellow police riot tape. They put it around their cube. When the riot tape was up, it meant do not disturb. You could use a very, very simple kind of and-on. You have a red card and a green card. When the green card is up, it means your door is metaphorically open. You're ready to be interrupted. When red is up, it means you stay away. The only thing that I would caution you is that if you're going to do something like any of those, what you want to do is provide information for people, again, visual management, so that if the red sign is up, there should also be a note pinned to it that says 2:30. And that's the time at which the red is going to turn to green. Because then your colleague will say, oh, it's 2:20, the red sign is up, I'm going to leave her alone because I'll just come back at 2:30. If the 2:30 sign is, alternatively, she may say, it's 2:20, I can't wait 10 minutes, I really need this information right now, I better interrupt you. That's the information you want. That's the interruption you want because it's something that truly is urgent. The second point I want to make is that there is an often faulty assumption here that your colleagues need instant response. And I would argue that what your colleagues want 99.9% of the time is predictable response, not instant response. We've trained them to expect instant response to IMs and to emails and whatnot. But they don't really need that because 9 out of 10 times I've sent something to you via email or IM because it was on my mind, and as soon as I got rid of it, I'm done. I've moved on to the other 37 things on my to-do list. So having a conversation inside the company and talking as a group about what are realistic and sustainable service level agreements, I think is very important. Is a 1-minute turnaround necessary? Is 10 minutes? Is 2 hours? Is it before close of business? That's a conversation that everyone should have because then you can start creating social norms that support more effective work and and less waste in the workplace. It's not an easy conversation to have because first people are going to look at you like you got 2 heads. But I think it's totally worth doing because everyone that you work with feels that way. Good question, April. Thank you.
All right, so let's go ahead and do one more, Dan, here. This one is from Jeffrey. Can you talk more about the personal Kanban system of organization that you mentioned? Where can I learn more about this? And can you talk about the success of such a system from the users?
The best place to go for that is a book called Personal Kanban, cleverly enough, by a guy named Jim Benson. And if you Google Personal Kanban, you'll find Jim's website. You'll see some samples of how they're built and how he's built it and why he's built it. The book is excellent and it's a fast read, and I think what you'll walk away with from that is really ideas on how you can adopt and adapt the concept to your own idiosyncratic work needs.
All right, very good. All right, Dan, well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this. Maybe we could do it again. We've got a lot of thank yous flowing in here from lots of people, so great job. Any final words?
No, thank you all very much. Good luck with this. It's not easy to do because we're all creatures of habit. And what I'm asking you to do is break those habits and to start becoming a little more objective about how you work. But it's well worth the journey. Good luck to everyone.
Okay.
And thank you, Ron, for allowing me to be part of this.
No problem. Thank you.